My fiancée said she wanted to build her identity separately before marriage. I respected that fully, rewrote the financial agreements, purchased property independently, and secured my long-term investments. She reached out when separate identity came without shared assets or legal protection. I don't want us to merge everything before we even figure out who we are individually. That sentence landed on a Tuesday evening, somewhere between the pasta getting cold and the wine being poured. I set my fork down slowly, not because I was angry, not because I was hurt exactly, but because something about the way she said it, the rehearsed calm, the measured tone, told me this had been practiced. This wasn't a thought she'd just had. This was a speech. Okay, I said. Just that. One word. And Vivian blinked at me like she'd expected a different reaction entirely. Hey viewers, before we move on to the video, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button if you want to see more stories like this. Let me give you the short version of who I am before this gets complicated. 34 years old. Software architect. Engaged for 11 months to a woman I'd been with for 3 years total. We met at a mutual friend's birthday, argued about a documentary within the first 20 minutes, and somehow ended up talking until 2 a.m. in a corner booth that no one else wanted. That was Vivian. Sharp, opinionated, funny in a way that surprised you. The kind of woman who could dismantle your entire argument about something and then laugh about it with you right after. I liked that about her more than anything else. By month 8 of dating, I knew I wanted to marry her. By year 2, we were planning it. By year 3, I'd bought the ring and done it properly. And she said yes, which made that Tuesday evening all the more confusing. What do you mean exactly? I asked her after a long pause. She pushed a piece of bread around her plate. I mean, I've spent my whole adult life building things around other people, she said. Around my parents' expectations, around what my friends were doing, around us. I want to know what I build when it's just for me. I nodded slowly. And how long does that take? I asked. Not sarcastically. Genuinely. She looked up at me. I don't know, she said. That's kind of the point. Now here's the part where most men would either push back or cave completely. I did neither. I asked her what she actually needed, practically speaking. Did she want to separate our shared accounts temporarily? Did she want to pause the wedding date? Did she want me to stop contributing to the joint savings we'd started building? She said she hadn't thought about the specifics yet. She just knew she didn't want to feel like her financial future was automatically tied to mine before she'd proven something to herself. And here's the thing, I understood that. On some level, I genuinely did. She'd come from a family where her mother had no financial independence, no career, no identity outside of being someone's wife. She'd watched that woman shrink herself for decades. She didn't want to become that. I respected that fear, so I told her I'd give her the space she needed. And I meant it. What I didn't tell her that evening was that her words had also quietly shifted something in my own mind. Not bitterness, not anger, more like clarity. If she wanted to build something separately, then I needed to start thinking about what I was building separately too. Not as punishment, not as a tactical response, but because for 2 years, I'd been planning everything with a partner in mind. Every financial decision, every investment, every plan, it had all been structured around the idea of a shared future. And she'd just told me that future wasn't as certain as I'd assumed. So I started paying attention. Over the next 2 weeks, she seemed lighter. She signed up for a pottery class. She started going out with her work friends more. She reorganized her home office, which was technically the guest room in my apartment, and started referring to it as her creative space. I didn't say anything. I just watched. And while she was rediscovering herself, I quietly made an appointment with a financial advisor. His name was Mr. Hartwell. Older guy, former corporate attorney turned independent financial planner. He'd helped my brother restructure his assets after a messy business partnership dissolved, so I trusted him. I sat across from him in a clean, quiet office and explained the situation without editorializing. Engaged. Partner wants financial independence before marriage. We haven't formalized anything legally yet. What does my current exposure look like? He listened. He asked a few questions, and then he leaned back in his chair and said something that I've thought about many times since. The most expensive mistake people make, he said, is assuming emotional agreements carry legal weight. He wasn't telling me to distrust her. He was telling me to be responsible. There's a difference. When I got home that night, Vivian was at the kitchen table with her laptop, working on what she called her personal brand. She'd started a blog, something about sustainable living and slow fashion, things she was genuinely passionate about. I made us both tea and asked how it was going. She smiled, really smiled. The way she used to when we'd first started dating, and everything was still electric. I feel like I'm finally doing something that's mine, she said. I put her mug down in front of her. I'm glad, I said. And I was. I was also, quietly, in the middle of the longest internal audit of my financial life. Here's what that audit revealed. I had one investment property that we discussed buying together, a 2-bedroom condo in a neighborhood that was already showing strong appreciation. We'd talked about putting both our names on it. We'd even toured it together. She liked it, but we hadn't signed anything yet. We hadn't combined any funds for it yet. It was still just a plan. I called the realtor the next morning, told him I wanted to move forward on the property, under my name only. He asked if the situation had changed. I said the timeline had shifted. He didn't press. We scheduled the next steps. Separately, I started reviewing every financial agreement we'd verbally committed to. The joint savings account we'd opened. I stopped contributing my scheduled monthly deposit and redirected it to a private investment account. The vacation fund we'd built together. I left my contributions in there, but made sure my amounts were clearly documented and traceable. The shared credit card I'd added her to. I removed my primary authorization, but kept her as a secondary user so her credit history wasn't disrupted. I wasn't trying to hurt her. I was trying to be precise. There's a meaningful difference between cruelty and clarity. About 6 weeks in, Vivian noticed. Not in a dramatic way. She was checking our shared savings app. Yes, we'd been using one of those couples finance apps, and she saw my last deposit was missing. She brought it up over breakfast. Did you forget the transfer this month? She asked. Casual, not accusatory. I looked at her. I've been restructuring some of my accounts, I said. I thought it made sense, given the conversation we had. A small pause. What conversation? She asked. About building independently, I said. About not merging everything before we figure out who we are separately. She stared at me for a second. I was talking about identity, she said slowly. I know, I said. But identity and finances aren't completely unrelated. She didn't say much after that. She nodded, finished her coffee, and left for work. That evening she seemed thoughtful, not upset, just processing, which was fair. I'd said something that reframed the entire conversation she thought she'd been having. She'd thought she was asking for emotional space. I'd pointed out, gently, that emotional space and financial autonomy go together, and that if she wanted one, I was going to quietly but responsibly practice the other. The property closed on a Thursday morning in early spring. I didn't make a big deal of it. I signed the papers alone, walked through the empty unit one more time, stood in the living room for about 10 minutes, just thinking. This was mine, not ours. Mine. And there was something bittersweet about that, something I hadn't entirely expected to feel. But beneath the bittersweetness was something steadier, something that felt a lot like self-respect. I told Vivian about it a few days later, not as a declaration, not as a challenge. I just mentioned it during dinner. The property closed, I said. She looked up. Which property? The condo we looked at together, I said. The one in Greenfield. A beat. You bought it? She asked. Yes. Under your name? Yes. She put her fork down. Without telling me, we weren't buying it together anymore, I said simply. That was never formally decided, she said, her voice tightening. We talked about it, I said. We talked about a lot of things, I said. But nothing was signed, nothing was agreed upon, and nothing was committed to legally. You're using lawyer language on me, she said quietly. I'm using accurate language, I said. That was the first night we went to bed in genuine tension. Not fighting, not crying, just tension. That specific, heavy silence that settles in when two people are both thinking and neither one wants to say the next thing out loud. The weeks after that had a strange texture to them. On the surface, things were mostly normal. We still had dinner together most nights. We still talked. She was still excited about her blog, which had actually started gaining traction. She'd picked up 3 small brand partnerships, which she was proud of, and rightfully so. She was building something real. And watching her do that, I felt something complicated. Pride, genuinely. Some distance, also genuinely. Like I was watching someone I loved become someone slightly separate from the future I'd imagined. In that same period, I made 2 more major financial decisions. First, I maxed out my retirement contributions for the year and restructured the allocation toward a more aggressive growth portfolio. Something I'd been meaning to do for a while, but had kept deferring because we'd been planning to consult a shared financial advisor together. We'd never gotten to that consultation, so I did it alone. Second, I met with a different attorney, an estate and contract specialist named Mr. Calloway. and discussed what a prenuptial agreement would look like, given our current situation. Not to weaponize it, not to threaten anything, but because if we were going to get married, and if she wanted independent financial identity, then a prenup was actually the responsible, respectful thing to do. It would protect both of us. It would define what was hers, what was mine, and what we chose to build together. Honestly, it was exactly in the spirit of what she said she wanted. Or so I thought. I brought it up one Sunday afternoon. She was on the couch with her laptop, editing photos for a post. I sat down across from her. "Can we talk about something?" I asked. She looked up. "Sure," she said. "I've been thinking about a prenup," I said. The laptop slowly closed. "A prenup?" she repeated. "Yes," I said. "I actually think it makes a lot of sense given what you said about building independently. A prenup protects your assets as much as mine," I said. "It codifies exactly what's yours, so there's no ambiguity if things ever got complicated." She was quiet for a long moment. "Things like what?" she asked finally. "Things like the condo," I said. "Things like your blog income. Things like my investment accounts." "A prenup doesn't mean we don't trust each other," I said. "It means we're being honest about what belongs to each of us individually." I'd expected some resistance. I hadn't expected the conversation that followed. "I feel like you've been building a case against me," she said. Her voice was low, not angry, something quieter and harder than anger. "I haven't," I said. "I've been building a foundation," I said. "There's a difference." "Since when do you talk like this?" she asked. "Like what?" I asked. "Like a financial advisor," she said. "Like someone who's already decided something." "I've been thinking clearly," I said. "That's all." "You've been pulling away from everything we planned," she said, "and doing it quietly so I wouldn't notice." "Vivian," I said slowly, "you told me you didn't want our futures merged before we figured out who we were separately. I was honoring that. I was listening to what you actually said." She stood up and walked to the window. Stood there for a long time. "I didn't mean any of this," she said quietly. "What did you mean then?" I asked. And this was the part, this exact moment, where everything that came after was decided. Because she turned around, and she said something that I don't think she entirely meant to say out loud. "I meant I wanted space to feel like myself," she said. "I didn't mean I wanted you to actually separate everything." "But that's what separating means," I said gently. "It means things are separate." She didn't have a response to that, and I didn't say it unkindly. I said it like someone who'd been listening very carefully and was now asking a simple question. "If you wanted independent identity, but not independent finances, what exactly did you want?" The prenup conversation stalled. She said she needed time to think about it. I said that was fine. I wasn't going anywhere. We weren't rushing down an aisle. She made sure of that. Over the next month, something subtle but unmistakable shifted in the dynamic between us. She started asking more questions about my finances. Casually at first. "What's happening with your investments these days?" she'd ask over breakfast. "How's the condo situation coming along?" she'd say. "Have you talked to that financial advisor recently?" I answered honestly every time. The investments were performing well. The condo was appreciating exactly as I'd expected. Mr. Hartwell had helped me diversify into some additional holdings. She'd nod, and then go quiet. One evening she came home with a folder. She sat down at the kitchen table like she was about to present something. Which, as it turned out, she was. "I've been doing some research," she said, "about assets and long-term relationships." "Okay," I said. "Did you know that in most states, if a couple lives together for an extended period and builds shared wealth, there's a concept called palimony?" she said. "I've heard of it," I said. "Technically, some of what you've built during our relationship could be considered." "Vivian," I said. Quiet, not cutting her off rudely, just stopping the sentence. "I know what you're about to say," I said, "and I want you to hear me clearly. We are not married," I said. "We have no formal financial agreement of any kind," I said. "And every major decision I've made in the past several months has been made independently, documented carefully, and structured in a way that reflects exactly what you said you wanted." A pause. "You said you wanted to build separately," I said. "I did. So did I." She closed the folder. She didn't say anything for a long moment. And then, quietly, she asked something that I think had been sitting under everything for months. "Are we still getting married?" she asked. It was the first time either of us had asked it directly. I looked at her. "Do you still want to?" I asked. She said yes. But there was a hesitation before it. A small, half-second delay that I heard very clearly. And I think she knew I heard it. Over the following weeks, the conversations got deeper and harder and more real than anything we'd had in months. maybe years. She admitted that when she'd said she wanted to build her identity separately, she'd been afraid. Not of me specifically, but of disappearing, of becoming invisible inside a partnership the way she'd watched her mother become invisible. She'd wanted reassurance that she could be someone on her own, but she'd expected me to keep everything in place while she figured that out. She'd expected the financial safety net to stay where it was while she worked through her emotional questions. And instead, I'd taken her at her word, completely and practically. I understood, when she explained it, that her original conversation hadn't been malicious. It had been a fear disguised as a philosophy. She'd wanted to feel independent without actually having to risk the security that came with our relationship. And the uncomfortable truth was, I couldn't fault her for having that fear. But I also couldn't go back and pretend the past several months hadn't happened. Because here's the thing about quietly reorganizing your entire financial life. Once you do it, you see clearly. You see what you'd built on assumptions instead of agreements. You see where you'd been trusting something that hadn't been tested. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. The prenup conversation came back around. This time, she brought it up. Maybe you were right about the prenup, she said one night. I looked at her. Maybe it's actually a good idea, she said. For both of us. I've been thinking about my blog, she said. If it keeps growing, and I think it will, I want to protect that income. From me? I asked. No, she said quickly. I want it to be clear that it's mine. I understand that, I said. So you do want the prenup? I said. Yes, she said quietly. I think I do. There was something quietly significant about that moment. She'd arrived at the prenup through self-interest, not through principled agreement. And I noticed that, filed it away without saying anything. We hired attorneys separately, as you're supposed to do for a prenup. Mine was Mr. Calloway. Hers was a woman named Ms. Delacroix, young, sharp, clearly capable. The first draft came back within 3 weeks. I read through it carefully with Mr. Calloway. Most of it was standard, but buried in the middle of section 4 was something interesting. A clause that defined certain investments I'd made during our relationship as relationship-adjacent assets, and argued that Vivian might have a reasonable claim to a portion of their appreciation. Mr. Calloway raised an eyebrow. This is aggressive, he said, especially for a prenup. It's not standard language, I said. No, he said. It's not. I sat with that clause for a few days before I said anything to Vivian. I wanted to understand if she knew about it, if she'd asked for it, or if Ms. Delacroix had inserted it independently as standard negotiation strategy. So I asked, diplomatically, neutrally. There's a clause in the draft that I want to talk about, I told her one evening. I pulled out the document and showed her the section. She read it, and I watched her face very carefully. She didn't look confused. She looked like she was calculating. Not panicked, not embarrassed. Calculating. It's just a starting position, she said. Attorneys always start aggressive. Did you ask for it? I said. A pause. I may have mentioned some concerns, she said. About the condo. The condo I purchased independently, I said. Yes, she said. But we discussed it together, she said. We looked at it together. We discussed it as a hypothetical, I said. Nothing was ever formalized, agreed to legally, or financially committed to jointly. I know, but, Vivian, I said, gently but clearly. If the position your attorney is taking is that our discussions create financial obligations, then I need to be very honest with you. That is not an agreement I can move forward on. There was a long silence, the longest we'd had, and in that silence, I think we both felt the ground shift under the relationship in a way that couldn't be unshifted. She withdrew the clause, or rather, Ms. Delacroix withdrew it after a conversation with Mr. Calloway. But something had been revealed, and we both knew it. We had the most honest conversation of our entire relationship the following Saturday morning. No phones, no laptops, just coffee and the kitchen table and 3 years of things that had never quite been said directly. She told me she'd panicked when she realized how much I'd restructured independently. She told me that when she'd said she wanted to build separately, she'd expected me to be patient and wait, not to actually act on it. She told me she'd felt scared watching me become financially independent of our shared plans. She told me that the clause in the prenup had been her attempt to feel like she still had some claim to a future we'd talked about together. I listened to all of it. I let her say everything without interrupting. And then I said this. I want to be careful here, I told her, because I love you. I have loved you for 3 years. I planned a future with you because I wanted that future. But I want to make sure I understand what you're telling me. You wanted me to hold the financial future in place while you worked out your identity. You wanted the shared assets, the shared property plan, the shared accounts to stay available to you while you built something independently. And when I took your words at face value and restructured accordingly, you felt that I'd taken something from you. She nodded slowly. Yes, she said. I need you to hear how that sounds, I said. Not cruelly, just clearly. That's not independence, I said. That's having a safety net while performing independence. She didn't argue with that. She looked down at the table, and in the quiet, I saw something I hadn't expected. She looked sad, not manipulative, not calculating, just genuinely sad. And for a moment, I remembered the woman in the corner booth at 2 a.m. who'd argued about a documentary and made me laugh harder than I had in years. She was still in there somewhere. She just hadn't been honest, maybe not even with herself, about what she actually needed. I think, she said quietly, that I was trying to test whether you'd still be there. And instead of holding on, I said, I responded to your actual words. Yes, she said. There was something almost like relief in her voice, like saying it out loud had finally made it real. I took a long breath. I don't think that was wrong of me, I said. No, she agreed quietly. But it still hurts, she said. I know, I said. I know it does. The months that followed were strange and real in equal measure. We didn't break the engagement immediately, but we did slow everything down in a way that felt permanent even before any decision was made. She moved back to her own apartment. She'd been subletting it to a friend, and when the lease came up, she took it back. She said she needed to actually try the independence she'd been talking about. For real this time. Not as a concept, as a lived experience. I helped her move some boxes. We weren't cruel to each other. We weren't cold. We were just two people who'd arrived at a very honest place after a very long detour. She called me about 4 months after she moved back to her apartment. I was at the condo, my condo, working remotely from the second bedroom I'd converted into an office. Can I come by? She asked. Of course, I said. She arrived in the late afternoon. She looked well, genuinely well. Her blog had continued growing. She'd landed a real partnership with a sustainable fashion brand that was paying her consistently. She had purpose in her face in a way that I'd wanted for her, that she'd wanted for herself. We sat in the living room of the condo that she'd once liked, that she'd once half expected to be hers. I want to be honest with you, she said. I'm listening, I said. I reached out because I've been thinking about us a lot, she said. About what happened. I think I understand now what I actually did, she said. I asked for independence as a feeling, she said. But I still wanted the structure of the relationship. I wanted to feel free without actually being at risk. And when you made me actually at risk, I panicked and tried to claim things that weren't mine. I nodded. I know, I said. I was watching it happen in real time, I said. And it broke my heart, I said. She looked at me for a long moment. Are you still in love with me? She asked. And this was the question I'd been sitting with for months. Not avoiding it, just holding it, turning it over, understanding what an honest answer looked like. I love who you've become, I said. The person building her own thing. The person who's actually doing what she said she wanted to do. I love that version of you. She waited. But I don't think I trust the version of you who said one thing and meant another, I said. Not yet, I said. Maybe not ever, in the way that marriage requires. She nodded, slowly, and she didn't cry, which, in its own way, told me that she'd known, that she'd come here with some version of this answer already in her. I think I knew you'd say that, she said. I think I needed to hear it anyway. I needed to know you weren't angry, she said. I'm not angry, I said. I'm just clear. There's a difference. She stayed for about an hour. We talked about her blog. We talked about some of the things that had been good between us, the real things, the 2 a.m. conversation things. When she left, she hugged me at the door in a way that felt like goodbye. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just final. I closed the door and stood in the hallway of my condo. My investment, my decision, my life, structured clearly and carefully, on terms I'd chosen with full information. And I felt the loss of her, really felt it, not as a wound, more like the clean ache of something that had mattered. The engagement was formally ended about 2 weeks later. She returned the ring. I'd asked her to when it became clear we weren't continuing. She did it without argument, without drama, which I respected. We handled the few remaining shared things the same way. The vacation fund was split proportionally and documented. The shared app was closed. The joint account was dissolved. Clean. Precise. Exactly the way two adults who once cared about each other should be able to handle an ending. People in my life had opinions, of course. A few friends thought I'd been cold. One colleague told me I'd been calculating. My brother, who'd been through his own financial dissolution, said I'd been smart. My mother, who knew Vivian well and liked her, said she thought I'd been fair but sad. Fair but sad. I thought that was probably accurate. There's something I want to say here that isn't a lesson and isn't advice. It's just something I've sat with long enough to feel like it's true. When someone tells you what they want, you have two choices. You can hear the emotional undercurrent, the fear, the need, the real thing underneath the words. Or you can respond to the actual words. Sometimes, doing both at once is possible. Sometimes, the person telling you what they want genuinely means it and deserves to be taken at face value. And sometimes, taking someone at their word is the only honest thing you can do. Not as a test, not as a tactic, but because their words were real and you chose to respect them. With Vivian, I took her word seriously. I reorganized my financial life to honor the independence she said she wanted. I purchased property on my own that I'd once planned to purchase with her. I restructured my investments without her input because she'd said she wanted to build separately. I pursued a prenup that would have given her full legal protection over everything she built independently. And when her attorney tried to reach back into what I'd built independently, I held the line. Not out of revenge, not out of coldness, but out of the same clarity she'd asked me to have. The condo is doing well, appreciated more than the original projection by a meaningful margin. I've since made 2 other independent investments, one real estate adjacent, one a private fund through Mr. Hartwell. My retirement portfolio is on track. My life is structured in a way that makes sense, not because I'm some calculating machine, but because I paid attention to what the people around me were actually doing, not just what they were saying. Vivian's blog grew into something genuinely impressive. Last I checked, and I did check, once on a quiet Sunday afternoon, she had around 80,000 followers. The sustainable fashion brand partnership had expanded. She was doing what she'd said she wanted to do. She was building something that was hers, and I was proud of her for that. I really was. She reached out one more time, about 7 months after the engagement ended. A short message, just 3 sentences. I've been thinking about our last conversation. I think you were one of the most honest people I've ever been with. I'm sorry it took me so long to be that honest back. I read it twice. Then I set the phone down. I didn't respond immediately. I thought about it for a few days. And eventually I wrote back. Thank you for saying that. I hope everything you're building continues to be yours. She replied with a single word. Same. And that was the end of it. Not a fight. Not a collapse. Not a dramatic scene in a parking lot or a tearful confrontation or a moment of triumph. Just 2 people who'd been honest with each other, eventually, imperfectly, arriving at a clean ending. Here's what I know now that I didn't know when she made that speech over cold pasta on a Tuesday evening. Some people want independence. Some people want the idea of independence. Those are 2 completely different things. The first kind will build something. The second kind will eventually look for someone to blame when there's nothing left to stand on. The first kind deserves to be taken seriously. The second kind deserves to be held accountable, gently, clearly, without cruelty. I'm not bitter. I want to be clear about that. Bitterness would mean I thought I'd been wronged. I don't think I was wronged. I think I was in a relationship with someone who didn't fully know herself yet. And I think my response to her uncertainty, quiet, structured, legally responsible, accelerated a truth that was always going to surface eventually. Better sooner. Better with the property in my name and the accounts clearly documented and the prenup on the table. Better before the rings were exchanged and the legal entanglement was real. I still think about her sometimes. I still think about that corner booth. I still think about what we could have been if she'd been honest earlier and I'd been a little less patient with honesty that came too late. But mostly I think about that moment in the empty condo, standing alone in the living room, looking at the walls of something I'd built by myself. That feeling, steady, clear, a little melancholy, entirely mine. That's the feeling I keep coming back to. Not because the story is inspiring, not because I won something, but because I did the thing that was true. I heard what she said. I believed her. I acted accordingly. And when the consequences of that arrived, for both of us, we faced them without pretending they weren't there. That's all any of us can really do. Hear what's being said. Believe it means something. Act on it honestly. And then live inside the outcome, whatever it turns out to be. The ring is in a box in my dresser drawer. I haven't sold it. I haven't kept it as a symbol of anything. I've just left it there, the way you sometimes leave things that meant something for a while, waiting to figure out what to do with them. Maybe I'll sell it someday. Maybe I'll give it to my brother for when the time comes for him. Maybe it'll just stay in that drawer for years. It doesn't matter. What matters is what it taught me. That love, real love, requires more than good conversations. It requires honesty about what you actually want. It requires being willing to face the real-world consequences of the things you ask for. And it requires being strong enough to let someone take you seriously, even when being taken seriously reveals something uncomfortable about what you actually meant. She wanted to build her identity separately. I let her. I built mine separately too. And when the shared identity we'd planned was no longer on the table, what we each had built individually was all we had. She had her blog, her followers, her partnerships, her sense of self. I had the condo, the investments, the structured, legally clean, clearly documented foundation of a life I'd built with careful hands. Neither of us had the future we'd planned, but both of us had something real, something that was genuinely ours. And in the end, that was exactly what she'd asked for. It just hadn't included what she'd expected. And sometimes, that's the most important sentence in any story. What you ask for and what you expect are not always the same thing. The gap between those two things is where the truth lives.